Cormac McCarthy explores darkness and death in Appalachian life. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. And today I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is from one of my favorite authors, and it is about life in Appalachia and babies that go missing. I am referring to Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy, which was published in 1968. For those who don't know, Cormac McCarthy was an American writer who lived in the mid-1900s to early 2000s. He wrote quite a few books, including westerns as well as crime stories and also apocalyptic stories too, often focusing on nihilism and death and destruction and human-caused misery. So not a very happy, optimistic writer. This is the fourth book that I've talked about from him, but this is the second book that he wrote in his life, or the second that he got published. We see some early signs of Cormac McCarthy, whereas the other stuff that I've talked about came later in his career. And there is quite a difference, although you can definitely see a through line on what McCarthy was talking about in his career. So without further ado, let's talk about Outer Dark. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Outer Dark focuses on Rintha and Culla Holm. They are a brother and sister living in Appalachia, an undisclosed area and an undisclosed time, although I think it's probably around the time that McCarthy was writing this story. So around the 60s, maybe earlier than that. And Rintha and Culla have engaged in an incestuous relationship, at least that's what we're led to believe, and Rintha became pregnant as a result. At the beginning of the story, she's giving birth to the child. The baby is pretty healthy, but she passes out, and during this time, Culla, because of his guilt or something like that, decides to take the baby into the woods and abandon it. A tinker comes upon the child and decides to raise it as his own. But when Culla goes back home, he tells Rintha that the baby died, which she doesn't believe him, and she goes on her own sort of quest to find this child. And Rintha, or Culla, abandons Rintha. Possibly out of guilt, possibly for many other reasons. And so the story kind of diverges from what's going on for the both of them. For Culla, he sort of abandons his family, goes off to find work elsewhere, and is run out of town a number of times, but he's also followed by a mysterious trio of men who are very dangerous and seem to attack and kill people who accuse him of crimes. And they even actively steal from Culla. Later on, he is trying to ford or cross a river on a ford or on a boat or something like that. When it capsizes, Culla survives, but the other people die in the process. Later, Culla is arrested for housebreaking, but he only really serves 10 days, and he's also accused of a crime of murder and flees, jumping off a sort of cliff, managing to survive in the process, but hurt as well. And it's there that he stumbles across the trio again, which I'll get to in a few moments. But Rintha, meanwhile, goes and searches for the tinker as well as her child, because she believes that the tinker who had stopped at her door previously has the child. She correctly assumes that. She works as a servant. She's still producing milk, which leads her to believe that the child might still be alive, because her body still believes the child is alive. Eventually, Rintha makes her way towards the tinker, confronts him, and the tinker refuses to give up the child. And Rintha admits to the fact that Culla is her brother and that the child is Culla's, but the tinker doesn't really believe her. He says it can't be true, and he runs off and says don't follow him. And she continues on with her journey, even ending up in a relationship that doesn't seem to work out when she flees as well later. And so when Culla eventually stumbles upon the trio of men, those trio have killed the tinker and taken the child. They have burned the child in some capacity. I don't know if that was the tinker or the trio, and one of the child's eyes is missing, which is very unfortunate. And then the trio sort of mocks Culla for what he's done in running away and abandoning the child, and they kill the child right there, ritualistically sacrifice it, and someone eats the child, which is very unfortunate and gross. And then later on, Rintha comes upon the aftermath of everything, finding the bones of her child. Doesn't really have a reaction to it and just sort of accepts it, passes out, and then moves on. Don't really know what's going on there. And as the story comes to a close, there is an afterword where Culla meets a blind man while traveling along a path. No one's there really guiding the blind man, and Culla points him off in a direction. The man travels down the road, but Culla notes that the blind man is going to a swamp, which might kill him. And Culla notes that someone should have told the blind man about the swamp and about where he's going, but Culla doesn't seem to do anything to stop him, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit worth talking about with Outer Dark. It's a very, dark, depressing, depraved kind of story, which doesn't have a happy ending. So it can be hard to read, and I'll make note of that first and foremost. But I think one of the themes that McCarthy's working with here is, of course, darkness. He subsumes the story in a dark atmosphere. It's basically the title, Outer Dark, which is a reference to a passage in the New Testament, the one of the Jesus parts of the Bible, where one of the gospel notes, like Jesus is talking to a centurion, and he says that the people of heaven will be cast out, and there will be a weeping and a gnashing of teeth in the outer dark, which I presume means that the people are being cast out of heaven from a paradise into something far darker. Maybe not hell, but something that's very close to it. And so can you argue that the people in this story, maybe humanity at large, has been cast out, and this story is kind of taking place in that darkness, in both the atmospheric as well as the literal, or maybe not literal, but figurative evil darkness that plagues humanity. And you see that, with the atmosphere, with the mysterious and eerie nights, just a whole, like McCarthy's kind of bathing the story in darkness. It's a very atmospheric kind of tale, but it's also, like, in terms of plot and whatnot, dark as well is what I'm getting at there. But there is an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. Night fell upon them dark and star-blown, and the wagon grew swollen at near mute with dew. On their chairs in such black immobility, these travelers could have been stone figures quarried from the architecture of an older time. And there you see a really sort of dark atmosphere. Like the people in here aren't, people anymore. They're like stone gargoyle type figures in a very dark and secluded, isolated kind of world. Very, very scary kind of writing there, very eerie kind of writing there. But like it's constantly following every single character. There might not be lights, and that's probably why, but also it could be that this is just the world that they live in, a very dark, kind of forsaken type world. The people themselves are forsaken, no hope for them, and they're taken advantage of at every turn by other people. So there's not much to really look forward to, and you can't really trust your fellow neighbor, unfortunately. But I will say the darkest kind of element is the trio in this story, the three men who follow Culla around and ultimately kill the baby. They are a very dark group. I don't know why they're exactly attacking people who are parallel to Culla, but they seem to bring only death and devastation with them. They could be demons, they could be just specters of death, but what's clear is that they exist in this world, and they make it feel more sinister as a result. You could argue that humanity is far gone, that we have been cast out of heaven, and this is all that remains for us. Maybe we're the only hope for ourselves, but we're not producing much hope for ourselves, is what I'm trying to get at there. McCarthy's not being an optimist, ultimately. Death is also a huge part of the story, because so much death happens in it. The death of the baby, the death of people who are in conjunction with Culla's life, the death of the Tinker, which is particularly violent. It's filled throughout the story. And so again, like, the trio can be seen as specters of death, or even demons who are bringing about destruction for their own personal gain. They don't seem to be having a lot to gain from it. And I will note that their ultimate cause, their ultimate form, isn't really revealed to us by Cormac McCarthy, a shortcoming of this story, I would say, because you can't just introduce these characters who seem to drive the plot forward and never really explain what they're doing here. I feel like that's weak writing on McCarthy's part, but that seems par for the course given everything else that he writes about and would write about later on in his life. So again, like, with all this death, like, are Rintha and Culla in hell? Did they die and they were sent to hell? And this is just what their hell is like, a constant reminder of their incestuous relationship, and Culla running away but never being able to fully escape his child, and Rintha never really being able to regain her child. It's just a permanent form of hell for them. And if this is just what Appalachia looks like, then Appalachia is not looking good. It's a terrible place to live, and it's forsaken, and you can't really trust the people around you. It's only going to bring death. Humanity has long since forgotten about this very secluded place in the world. And I've touched upon this already, but McCarthy is talking about Appalachia here, Appalachian life, the life of the people who live in the West Virginia type area right there. He paints a harsh picture of life in Appalachia. Again, there's this constant struggle, because for eons now, the people in this region have been forgotten, especially as resources have been taken out of the area, and you're left with, mining ghost towns and things like that. And to further compound it, there's financial struggles of people trying to find jobs and not really able to. There's incest between Rintha and Culla in the story, although it might be prevalent amongst other people who live there. And people are just wary of strangers in general. Any person that you don't know could be trying to take advantage of you, or trying to rob or harm you in some way. Culla is met with a lot of suspicion in this story as he wanders from town to town in search of a job. Now, that's not to say there isn't kindness in this story. There are people who feed and clothe and provide shelter for Culla and Rintha. Kind of an element of, this place is forsaken, but there is still some hope. There are people who are still hardworking and want to see the betterment of their community here. So there is some positivity. It might clash a little bit with what Cormac McCarthy is ultimately trying to say, but this place isn't completely far gone, even if it is kind of hollow and desolate at times. And I do think McCarthy is also leaning into stereotypes of the people of this region a little bit. I don't know if he did his research or anything like that, but it does seem like he's kind of leaning into a stereotype of mountain people, of hill people, essentially, and is just trying to add to it in order to really tell a story of Appalachia, tell a story of Rintha and Culla, because it doesn't seem like these characters have much personality outside of stereotypes that we might have heard about Appalachia 1,000 times before. Maybe like adding fully fleshed out characters would take away from the atmosphere that he's trying to create, but I just think it's a minor problem that kind of hurts the story a little bit. Now, there are a couple of other issues. The story is kind of hard to follow at times, especially because, again, Culla and Rintha aren't fully fleshed out, and the trio in this story of their purpose isn't fully explained. So I'm not really sure what Cormac McCarthy is trying to say, and especially because he doesn't really get to a major point. The story is filled with lots of suffering, lots of death, and lots of harsh realities of the world, and I don't think he's trying to portray an accurate view of what Appalachia is like, because there is no trio of people haunting Appalachia and killing people at whim. I don't think that's actually what's happening. Maybe he's just trying to point to a greater nihilism in the world, but I don't think he's doing that particularly well. I will say that, again, this is the second story that Cormac McCarthy wrote, so there is room for improvement, of course, and I do think he's working with a lot of the same themes that would show up in Blood Meridian, No Country for Old Men, and The Road, especially in like Blood Meridian, where the judge has a parallel with the trio in this story, and No Country for Old Men, where Anton Chigurh, has a parallel with the trio in this story. So I do think he would better develop the ideas that he's working with here into a more coherent story and easier to follow, whereas it feels kind of rough. It feels like this could have used a couple passes, and certain elements could have been fleshed out to better give the readers an understanding of what exactly you're trying to say here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy. A number of problems with the story, but I don't feel like it overall takes away from my enjoyment of it. It's very near perfect, and I think Cormac McCarthy would improve upon this formula, as I said before, with Blood Meridian, which is one of the best books ever written, and No Country for Old Men, which is also a pretty solid book. So ultimately, I think it's pretty solid. I do think it's worth checking out, but it can be hard to follow, and it is pretty bleak. So it might not be for everyone. So if you want to see some of McCarthy's old work that was later improved upon and subsequent visions, you can absolutely check it out from your local library. But if you want something that's more solid, maybe check out his later work. If you have any thoughts on this, or you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Cormac McCarthy or the Outer Dark, if you want to explore that further. Join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about books, movies, TV, that sort of thing. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Appalachian related travels. Farewell.